All right, you're back to watch some more U.S. history with Mr. Peterson. And hey, if you've been watching the first 5 episodes of this series, well, first off, if you haven't watched them, you need to go back and do that right now. You can probably, maybe we'll link to it. I don't know. Anyways, go watch those. If you've been watching them, you're probably wondering like, okay, so I thought this was U.S. history. I feel like it's like North American history and world history. When do we get into the actual United States part? Like anything, we got to lay that foundation to get you the proper base knowledge before we can move on to the big stuff. But we're starting to get into that in this episode. Stick around and find out. In the last few videos, we've been talking about the different nations that have been laying claims in the New World, specifically in North America. We talked about how Spain had a lot of claims early on in the American Southeast and in the Southwest and in the Caribbean. We talked about how France has really been focusing their claims up in modern day Canada. And then the English were coming along there on the eastern coast of North America, what is now the eastern coast of the United States. And they've been making claims. We even talked about some early English settlements in the last episode as well. If you remember, the Spanish Armada took out Spain from the equation. England was able to roam free, as we said, in their New World explorations, and now they're getting ready to start settling more than just 1 or 2 colonies. Now word is out and everybody is looking to travel to the New World. If you remember, we talked about some reasons for colonization in the last episode, and really we're going to revisit some of those concepts, but last episode was more talking about why England as a nation would want to colonize in the New World. Today we're going to be talking about why an actual Englishman might want to come to the New World. And really we're just going to keep building on why English colonies in the New World were different than the Spanish and French colonies. So here we go. First reason we touched on in the last episode, and that was the ability to own land. Owning land was not really an option for a common Englishman. Most of the land had been tied up in noble families for centuries, and getting your hands on a piece of it was almost impossible. So the idea that you could sail across the ocean under the protection of your government and claim vast amounts of land really appealed to lots of common Englishmen. The only problem is, how in the world are they going to get the funds to do that? We'll talk about that in a minute. But the first reason why most Englishmen would want to go to the New World, it's an opportunity to own land. They've never had that before, and they're really excited to do that. Reason number 2 why an Englishman would want to go and colonize in the New World is simply this: they wanted more religious freedom. Now, England has been really one of the bastions of freedom in Europe for quite some time. The Magna Carta in 1215, way back in world history, gave them and guaranteed them certain rights. It dictated that the king himself would be under the common law of the land. However, we see that England was starting to make some changes and shifting back toward authoritarian rule. James I and Charles I were looking to strengthen the English monarchy and downplay the role of English representative government. And also too, we see that while England was one of the first nations to separate from the Roman Catholic Church, they established the Anglican Church as really the only church that you could be a part of. So you have different Protestant factions in England that are really being persecuted religiously, and they're also looking for a place where they can not only own land but also have more religious freedom to worship God as they please. Reason number 3 why an Englishman would want to move to the New World is simply this: adventure. That's right, adventure. Some people were just tired of life as it was in England, and they decided, hey, if I can get on a boat, sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and lay my claim and make a life for myself in the New World, not be a part of the normal, mundane, everyday European life, why wouldn't I want to do that? So lots of people did. And also the people who didn't really want adventure, were going for other reasons, they actually ended up having some adventure, because colonizing a new place in the world is incredibly difficult, incredibly hard, and filled with lots of twists and turns. Now that we've established some baseline reasons for why an Englishman or woman would want to travel to the New World, now that we've established that, we need to talk about how hard it actually was to get to the New World. First, when you think about it, you have to pretty much sell all of your belongings if you have that many. You have to pack up, you have to get on a boat, and that boat was not the cruise ships or the luxury liners that you might be familiar with today. It was a wooden vessel. There was not a lot of room, and it was a long, arduous voyage. It could take up to 3 months to get from southern England to parts of North America, and you'd be crammed on this boat forever. Lots of boats didn't make it. Lots of people didn't make it. There's all kinds of diseases that are associated with sea travel. Very many reasons why even the trip over would be difficult. Not to mention the fact that when you get there, There's going to be other hardships. You actually have to find a spot to colonize and to settle. You have to defend yourself against what might be hostile natives that are there on the shore waiting to greet you. But out of all of these things, the biggest factor, as it always is in life, isn't it, is money. The typical common Englishman just did not have the money to get to the New World. So how's he going to do it? Well, fortunately for the common Englishman wanting to go to the New World, money was also something that other people were concerned about, because the colonies, the New World, this new land over here in America had opportunity not just for people to go and colonize, but opportunity for investors. And lots of wealthy businessmen were willing to put their money in to make a colony successful in hopes that they could make profits off of that colony. One of the things that Jamestown, the first English colony in the New World, had developed was the farming of the tobacco plant. And the tobacco plant was all the rage in Europe. So Jamestown was turning quite a profit, raising, harvesting, and selling tobacco back to Europe. Also too, these companies that were invested and the government that's invested in these colonies is able to make money off the top of this. And you get kind of this triangular trade route where raw goods would go from the colonies to the mother country, who would process those goods and then sell them to another place or sell them back to the colonies themselves. This triangular trade / mercantile system is going to be a huge factor in the building of the colonies and ultimately the building of America. So with all this profit on the table for people, if they would just invest in a colony, that's exactly what starts happening. You get private investors that start to band together to make what's called joint stock companies. And these joint stock companies would basically just raise money to support a new colony. It was usually a bunch of wealthy businessmen. They would get together, they would put all the key capital into the pool, and they would pool their money and get ready to support a colony. Then they would seek out investors. These investors were able to buy what is called stock in a company, and yes, that's where we get those terms. They would be able to buy stock in this company. So really buying stock in a colony could be a great investment if everything goes well. Then the joint stock company would go and they would recruit people who were willing. They would recruit common folk. They would recruit noblemen that were willing to go and travel to the New World and actually be the colonists, the colonizers in this situation. One of the most famous joint stock companies of this time would be the Virginia Company that was based out of London. And they funded several of the key early American colonies that we'll be talking about here pretty soon. So now what was left, if you were a joint stock company and you have your capital, you have your investors, you have your colonists, now you have to go and get a charter. A charter is permission to settle and colonize in a certain area. This was given by the English government or by anyone who owned the land. The charter was exactly what it sounds like, a charter. It was a contract, and it would specifically line out like where in the New World this colony would be, where it was supposed to be, and then also the rules and laws that would govern the people in this colony and the exports from this colony. That was the part that the joint stock companies were very concerned about, the colony's exports, because that's where the money came from. So any type of colony that was founded by a joint stock company with a charter is known in history as a charter colony. These charter colonies were approved by the government of England, but they were owned by the joint stock companies. So it was an interesting mix of government and then also private ownership. There are two other types of colonies, and by the way, you're going to want to know all three of these types of colonies. There were two other types though. The first one is called a proprietary colony, and the proprietary colony is basically just property that's been given to an individual or a group of people by the English government. What you would have lots of times is you would have noblemen that would fall in the good graces of the king or of the queen, and they would be gifted land in the New World. And whether that was to pay off a debt that the king might owe to that person, or maybe it was just a situation where the king really liked somebody. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna give you some land in the New World. That was how these proprietary colonies began. Other types of proprietary colonies was if the government, the Crown of England, decided to give land to a group of people. Different religious groups would sometimes get property in the New World through these proprietary colonies, but most of the time it was one key individual, and then maybe he would give that out to different people. But these proprietary colonies were different than charter colonies because they weren't governed by a charter, they were governed by the person who owned the colony under the watchful eye of the English government. So charter colonies are government approved, and companies company owned. Then you have your proprietary colonies that are government approved, but individually or group owned, not by a company, not by people who have stock in it. And then you get to your third type of colony, which is your royal colony, also sometimes referred to in history as a crown colony. The royal colony is exactly what it sounds like. It's owned and operated by the Crown of England. So basically it's kind of like just an extension of England geographically on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And so these are the three types of colonies that you're going to want to know for the founding of the United States of America. Almost every colony of the original 13 were one of these types of colonies or some sort of mix. But again, you see the differences between how other nations are approaching their possessions in the New World and how England is doing it. This interesting mix of government approval but privately run is what made some of these colonies fairly efficient and fairly profitable, and it caused them to continue to have success. They weren't operated by the military. They weren't governed by just the king or one of his royal governors. Lots of these were governed by people who lived in the colonies. It was a form of self-government, and they were able to make responsive decisions because they were there seeing the actions and seeing the hardships and seeing the struggles of the colonists every day. And it really ended up being a great situation for many of these colonies. Now, we do need to talk about the things that were happening in the colonies. With the introduction of other types of crops that make colonies profitable, you saw several colonies investing heavily in the North Atlantic slave trade, which hasn't quite reached its peak in its history, but is beginning to rise due to the demand that has been created by the profit margins of some of these colonies. The unfortunate benefit of purchasing a slave to do the work for you is that they were a slave to you for life, and then they also, any children that they had also became the property of the owner of that slave. So you begin to see the dark shadow of slavery really starting to loom in American history even before we are the United States of America. We'll talk more about that and other things as we get to the actual individual colonies. We'll talk about what type of colony they were, who owned them, how they operated, and much, much more in future episodes. We look forward to seeing you then. We're moving along here in U.S. history, and a lot of you aren't subscribed. I'm just calling it like I see it. I'm calling you how analytics tells me. You're not subscribed. Subscribe to the channel. See that red button? Do it. Click it. Turn on notifications. At least like the video. At least comment. We'll talk to you later.